In the bustling city streets, where the scent of opportunity hangs in the air and restless minds seek the next great American dream, stands a man who defied all limits, Phineas Taylor Barnum. With bold vision and unwavering determination, Barnum not only created an entertainment empire, but also mastered the art of making money. From circus spectacles that captured the public's imagination to innovative advertising strategies that defined an era, every step of Barnum's journey was infused with ingenuity and audacity. In this text, we will delve into the secrets behind Barnum's legendary success, unraveling the strategies that propelled him from poverty to worldwide fame. Prepare for a fascinating journey through Barnum's brilliant mind, where each chapter reveals timeless lessons on the art of persuasion, the power of creativity, and the importance of believing in oneself. Open your ears to captivating tales of triumphs and setbacks, and let Barnum's inspiration guide you on your own quest for success and prosperity. In this world, it is not difficult at all for healthy individuals to make money in this relatively new field. There are so many paths to success, so many unsaturated callings, that anyone of any gender willing to dedicate themselves, even momentarily, to any respected occupation available can find employment that brings in a lot of money. Those who truly desire to achieve independence need only set their minds to it and adopt appropriate means, just as they would for any other goal they wish to attain, and it easily becomes reality. But as easy as it is to make money, I have no doubt that many of my listeners would agree that the hardest thing in the world is to keep it. The path to wealth is, as Dr. Franklin said, as simple as the path to the mill. It simply consists in spending less than we earn. This seems to be a very simple problem. Mr. Micawber, one of those happy creations of Dickens's genius, highlights the case by saying that to possess an annual income of £20 and spend £20 and sixpence is to be the most miserable of men, whereas to have an income of only £20 and spend only £19 and sixpence is to be the happiest of mortals. Many of my listeners might say, "We understand this. It's about economy, and we know that economy is wealth. We know we can't have our cake and eat it too." However, I venture to say that perhaps there are more cases of failure that arise from mistakes at this stage than from almost any other cause. The fact is that many people think they understand economy when they really do not. True economy is misunderstood, and people go through life without properly understanding this principle. They say to themselves, "I have an income of such and such, and here's my neighbor who has the same, yet every year he progresses while I lag behind. Why is this? I know all about my economy, or at least I think I do." But that's not the case. There are men who think economy means saving bits of cheese and candle ends, cutting 2p off the laundress's bill, and doing all sorts of petty, dirty things. Economy is not meanness. Furthermore, the unfortunate part is that this class of people lets their economy apply in only one direction. They think they're wonderfully economical by saving half a penny where they should be spending 2. They think they can afford to waste in other directions. A few years ago, before kerosene oil was discovered or thought of, one could spend the night at almost any farm in the agricultural regions and have a very good dinner. But after dinner, trying to read in the sitting room was impossible with the insufficient light of a candle. The hostess, seeing your dilemma, would say, "It's quite difficult to read here in the evening. The proverb says you must have a boat on the sea in order to burn 2 candles at once. We never have an extra candle except on special occasions, and those special occasions may happen twice a year." In this way, the good lady saves $5, $6, or $10 over that period, but the information she could gain from having the extra light would of course far surpass a ton of candles. But the problem does not stop there. Thinking to be so economical with tallow candles, she thinks she can afford to frequently go into town and spend $20 or $30 on ribbons, many of which are unnecessary. This mistaken notion can frequently be observed among businessmen, and in these cases, it often extends to letter paper. You find good businessmen who keep all the old envelopes and pieces of paper and wouldn't tear a new sheet of paper if they could avoid it for the world. All of this is fine. It can save them $5 or $10 a year in this way, but by being so economical only with paper for notes, they think they can afford to waste time having expensive parties and driving their cars. This is an illustration of Dr. Franklin saving at the spigot and wasting at the bunghole. Speaking of this single-minded category of people, he says they are like the man who bought a herring for a penny for his family's dinner, then hired a team and 4 horses to bring it home. I have never known anyone to succeed by practicing this type of economy. True economy consists in always ensuring that income exceeds expenses, in wearing old clothes a little longer if necessary, in going without the new pair of gloves, in mending the old dress, in living on simpler food if need be, so that in every circumstance, unless an unforeseen accident occurs, there is a margin in favor of income. A penny here and a dollar there, placed at interest, accumulate, and thus achieve the desired result. Perhaps a little training is needed to achieve this economy, but once accustomed, you will find more satisfaction in rational saving than in irrational spending. Here is a recipe that I recommend. I have found it to be an excellent remedy against extravagance, and particularly against erroneous economy. When you find that at the end of the year you have no surplus despite good income, I advise you to take a few sheets of paper and form them into a book. Note every expense, every day or every week in 2 columns, one entitled Needs or even Comforts, and the other entitled Luxuries. You will discover that the latter column will be double or even triple and often 10 times larger than the former. The true comforts of life cost only a small part of what most of us can earn. Dr. Franklin says it is the eyes of others and not our own that ruin us. If everyone were blind except me, I would care little for fine clothes or furniture. It is the fear of what Mrs. Grundy might say that keeps the nostrils of many respectable families on the grindstone. In the United States, many like to repeat that we are all free and equal, but this is a great mistake in more ways than one. We are born free and equal, which is a glorious truth in one sense. But we are not all born equally rich, nor will we ever be. One might say there is a man who earns $50,000 a year, while I earn only $1,000. I know this type. When I was as poor as I am now, he was rich and thought himself better than me. I will prove to him that I am as good as he is. I will go and buy a horse and carriage. No, I cannot afford it, but I will go and rent one and ride this afternoon on the same road as him to prove to him that I am as good as he is. My friend, you need not go to this trouble. You can easily prove that you are as good as him by simply acting like him. You cannot make anyone believe that you are as rich as he is. Furthermore, if you adopt these manners and spend your money in this way, your poor wife will be forced to tighten her belt at home, buying tea 2 by 2 and everything else in proportion, so that you can maintain appearances and ultimately fool no one. On the other hand, Mrs. Smith might say that her next-door neighbor married Johnson for his money, and everyone says so. She has a pretty camel's hair shawl worth $1,000, so she will ask Smith to get an imitation and sit on a bench right next to her neighbor at church to show that she is the same. My good woman will not get on in this world if your vanity and jealousy take over like this. In this country where we believe the majority should rule, we ignore this principle when it comes to fashion, and let a small group of people calling themselves the aristocracy set a false standard of perfection, and in the effort to rise to this standard, we remain constantly poor, constantly scratching for outward appearances. It is much wiser to be one's own law and to say, we will regulate our outings according to our income and save something for rainy days. People should be as sensible about earning money as about any other subject. Similar causes produce similar effects. One cannot accumulate a fortune by taking the road to poverty. No prophet needs to tell us that those who live fully, according to their means without thinking about a setback in this life, can never achieve financial independence. Men and women accustomed to satisfying all their whims will find it difficult at first to reduce their various unnecessary expenses and will feel that it is a great sacrifice to live in a smaller house than they are used to, with less expensive furniture, fewer servants, fewer balls, parties, theatre outings, carriage rides, pleasure trips, smoking cigars, drinking alcohol, and other extravagances. But after all, if they try the plan of accumulating a small nest egg, or in other words, a small sum of money with interest or wisely invested in land, they will be surprised at the pleasure derived from the constant addition to their small reserve, as well as all the habits of economy that arise from this approach. The old suit and old hat and dress will suffice for another season. Fresh water from a spring is better than champagne. A cold bath and a brisk walk will be more invigorating than a luxury carriage ride. A social conversation, a family reading evening, or an hour of board games will be much more enjoyable than a $50 or $500 party when considering the cost difference for those who are beginning to appreciate the pleasures of economy. Thousands of men remain in poverty, and tens of thousands become so after acquiring enough to live comfortably all their lives, because they have based their life plans on too broad a foundation. Some families spend $20,000 a year, or much more, and would struggle to live on less, while others enjoy a more solid life, often with a 20th of that amount. Prosperity is a more severe test than adversity, especially sudden prosperity. What comes easily goes easily is an old true proverb. The spirit of pride and vanity, when allowed full control, is the worm that gnaws at the very entrails of a man's earthly possessions, whether small or large, hundreds or millions. Many people, when they begin to prosper, immediately expand their ideas and start spending on luxuries until their expenses quickly exceed their income, ruining their ridiculous attempts to maintain appearances and make a sensation. I know a wealthy man who said that when he began to prosper, his wife had a new, elegant sofa. "That sofa," he said, "cost me $30,000. When the sofa arrived home, matching chairs had to be bought, then sideboards, carpets and tables to match, and so on throughout the furniture stock. In the end, it was found that the house itself was too small and outdated for the furniture, so a new one was built to match the new purchases." Thus added my friend, by adding an expense of $30,000 caused by this single sofa, and assembled by me as a baggage servant, and in addition to the necessary expenses to maintain a beautiful home, they resulted in an annual expenditure of $11,000, whereas 10 years ago we lived with much more genuine comfort, with much less worry, for only a few $100s. The truth is, he continued, that this sofa would have led me to inevitable bankruptcy if a streak of prosperity had not kept me above it, and if I had not restrained the natural desire to cut ties. The foundation of success in life is good health. It is the substrate of wealth, as well as the foundation of happiness. A person cannot accumulate a fortune when they are ill. They have no ambition, no incentive, no strength. Of course, there are those who have poor health and can do nothing about it. Such people cannot be expected to accumulate a fortune, but there are many people with poor health who need not be so. If health is the foundation of success and happiness in life, how important it is to study the laws of health, which are nothing but another expression of the laws of nature. The more we conform to the laws of nature, the closer we come to good health. Yet how many people pay no attention to natural laws, but absolutely violate them, even against their own natural inclinations? We must know that the sin of ignorance is never ignored when it comes to violating the laws of nature. Its transgression always brings punishment. A child may put their finger in flames without knowing they will get burned, and thus suffer remorse. Even intelligence will not stop it. Many of our ancestors knew very little about the principle of ventilation. They did not know much about oxygen, no matter how much gin they knew. Consequently, they built their houses with small rooms 7 by 9 feet. These good, pious Puritans confined themselves in one of these cells, said their prayers, and went to bed. In the morning, they devoutly thanked for preserving their lives during the night, and no one had a better reason to be grateful. Probably a large crack in the wall or the door let in a little fresh air and saved them. Many people deliberately violate the laws of nature against their better instincts to follow fashion. For example, there is one thing that no one, except the earthworm, has ever naturally liked, and that is tobacco. Yet how many people deliberately enter into an unnatural appetite for it, surpassing to such an extent this tobacco-imposed inclination that they come to like it? They have allowed themselves to be caught by a toxic and repulsive herb, or rather, it has firmly taken hold of them. There are married men who spit tobacco juice on the carpet and floor, and sometimes even on their wives. They do not beat them like drunkards do, but they often wish they were out of the house. Another dangerous characteristic is that this artificial appetite, like jealousy, grows with what nourishes it. When one loves what is unnatural, It creates a stronger appetite for what harms than the natural desire for what is harmless. There is an old proverb that says, "Habit is second nature, but an artificial habit is stronger than nature." Take, for example, an old tobacco chewer. His love for tobacco is stronger than his love for any kind of food, especially. He can give up roast meat more easily than the herb. The young regret not being men. They would like to go to bed like children and get up like men, and to achieve this they imitate the bad habits of their elders. Little Tom and Johnny see their parents or uncles smoking a pipe and say, "If I could do that, I would be a man too." Uncle John went out and left his tobacco pipe. "Let's try it." They take a match and light it, then take a puff. "Learning to smoke, do you like it, Johnny?" The boy sadly replies, "Not really, it tastes bitter." Gradually he turns pale but persists and soon offers a sacrifice at the altar of fashion. But the boys cling to it and persevere until they eventually overcome their natural appetites and become victims of acquired tastes. I speak from the book, for I have noticed its effects on myself, having smoked 10 or 15 cigarettes a day for the past 14 years, although I have not touched the herb since, and never will again. The more a man smokes, the more he desires to smoke. The last cigar smoked only excites the desire for another, and so on. For example, the tobacco chewer, as soon as he wakes up in the morning, puts a pound of tobacco in his mouth and keeps it there all day without ever taking it out, except to replace it with a new one, or when he eats. At intervals throughout the day and night, many chewers take the pound out and keep it in their hand just long enough to take a sip, then put it back. This simply shows that the appetite for rum is even stronger than that for tobacco. When the tobacco chewer goes into your orchard or garden and you show him your garden beauties, when you offer him dried and ripe fruits and tell him, "My friend, here are the most delicious apples, pears, peaches, and apricots imported from Spain, France, and Italy. Look at these delicious grapes. Nothing is more delicious or healthier than ripe fruits. So help yourself. I want to see you delight in these things." He will pass dear Kit under his tongue and reply, "I thank you not. I have tobacco in my mouth." His palate is narcotized by this harmful herb, and he has largely lost the delicate and enviable taste for fruits. This demonstrates the costly, unnecessary, and harmful habits that men acquire. I speak from experience, for I smoked until I trembled like a poplar leaf. My blood rushed to my head, and I had heart palpitations that I thought were heart disease, until fear almost killed me. When I consulted my doctor, he said, "Stop smoking tobacco." Not only was I harming my health and spending a lot of money, but I was also setting a bad example. I obeyed his advice. No young man in the world is as handsome as he thinks behind a 15-cent cigar or a cloud of smoke. These observations apply tenfold to drinking for the purpose of making money. It takes a clear brain. A man must see that 2 and 2 make 4. He must establish all his plans with reflection and foresight, and closely examine all the details and peculiarities of business. Likewise, as intelligent as a man may be, if his mind is clouded and his judgment distorted by alcohol, it is impossible for him to successfully conduct affairs. How many opportunities have been lost forever while a man takes a drink with a friend? How many senseless transactions have been made under the influence of the nerve substance that temporarily convinces its victim that they are wealthy? How many important opportunities have been postponed to tomorrow and then forgotten forever, because the glass of wine plunged the system into a state of lethargy, neutralizing the energies so essential to success in business? Truly, wine is a deceiver. The use of alcoholic beverages as a drink is as irrational as opium is to the Chinese. The former is as destructive to the success of the businessman as the latter is an unspeakable evil, totally indefensible in the light of philosophy, religion, or common sense. It is the father of almost all other evils in our country. Do not confuse your calling. The safest and most successful plan for a young man starting out in life is to choose a vocation that most suits his tastes. Parents and guardians are often too negligent in this regard. It is very common for a father to say, for example, "I have 5 children. I will make Bill a clerk, make myself a lawyer, make you a doctor, and dedicate Sam to the farm." Then he goes to town, looks around to see what Sam could do, and comes home saying, "Sam, I see watchmaking is a good trade, my dear. I think I'll make you a jeweler." He does this without regard to Sam's natural inclinations or genius. We are all doubtlessly born for a wise purpose. There is as much diversity in our brains as in our faces. Some are born mechanics by nature, while others have a great aversion to machinery. Gather a dozen 10-year-old children, and you will soon notice that 2 or 3 are whittling some ingenious device, working on locks or complicated machines. When they were only 5 years old, their father could not find any toys that pleased them, such as a puzzle. They are mechanics by nature, but the other 8 or 9 children have different aptitudes. I belong to this latter class. I have never had the slightest love for mechanics. On the contrary, I have a sort of disgust for complicated machines. I have never had the ingenuity required to carve a cider faucet so that it doesn't drip. I have never been able to make a pen with which to write, nor understand the principle of a steam engine. If a man took a boy like me and tried to turn him into a watchmaker, the boy might, after an apprenticeship of 5 or 7 years, be able to disassemble and reassemble a watch. But all his life, he would work reluctantly, seeking any excuse to leave his work and waste time. Watchmaking would be repulsive to him. Unless a man devotes himself to the vocation intended for him by nature, the one that best suits his particular genius, he cannot succeed. I am happy to believe that most people find their appropriate vocation. However, we see many people who have missed their calling, from the blacksmith to the clerk. You will see, for example, an extraordinary linguist, the scholarly blacksmith, who should have been a language professor. And you will see lawyers, doctors, and clergymen who are naturally better suited for the hammer or the stone. Choosing the right place after finding the appropriate vocation is just as important. You might be meant to be a hotelier. It is said that it takes a genius to know how to manage a hotel. You might run a hotel like clockwork and effectively serve 500 guests every day. However, if you place your establishment in a small village without railroad communication or public transportation, the location would be its ruin. It is equally important not to start a business where there are already enough to meet all the demands in the same occupation. I remember a case that illustrates this point. When I was in London in 1858, I passed Holdboard with an English friend, and we arrived at the penny shows. They had immense drawings outside depicting the wonderful curiosities that could be seen, all for a penny. Being somewhat attracted to the spectacle, I said, "Let's go in here." Soon we found ourselves in the presence of the illustrious showman, who turned out to be the most skilled man in his field that I had ever encountered. He told us some extraordinary stories about his bearded ladies, albino exhibits, and armadillos, which we could scarcely believe, but we thought it better to believe than to seek proof. Finally, he drew our attention to some wax figures. He showed us a heap of wax figures dirtier and more disgusting than one could imagine, which seemed not to have seen water since the flood. "What is wonderful about your statuary?" I asked. "I beg you not to speak with such satire, sir," he replied. "These are not Madame Tussaud's wax figures, all covered in gold and fake diamonds, and copied from engravings and photographs. Mine, sir, have been taken from life. Every time you see one of these figures, you may consider that you are looking at the living individual." Looking closely at them, I saw one labelled Henry VIII, and resembling somewhat Calvin Edson, the living skeleton. I said, "You call that Henry VIII?" He replied, "Certainly, sir. He was taken in the flesh at Hampton Court by special order of His Majesty on such a date. He would tell you the time of day." "If I had opposed that," I said, "everyone knows that Henry VIII was an old king, very corpulent, and this figure is thin and elongated. What do you say to that?" "Because," he replied, "you would be thin and lean too if you had sat there as long as he did." There was no way to resist such arguments. I said to my English friend, "Let's get out of here. Don't tell him who I am. He'll pin me." He followed us to the door, and seeing the crowd in the street shouted, "Gentlemen, please pay attention to the appearance of my visitors," pointing us out. As we walked away a few days later, I called him. I told him who I was and said, "My friend, you are an excellent showman." "But he chose a bad location," I replied. "That's true, sir. I feel all my talents are wasted. But what can I do?" "You could go to America," I said to him. "There, you could unleash your faculties. In America, you will find plenty of space to expand. I will offer you a 2-year contract. Then you can be independent. He accepted my offer and stayed 2 years in my museum in New York. Then he went to New Orleans and held a traveling show there in the summer. Today he is worth $60,000 simply because he chose the right vocation and also secured the right location. The old proverb says that 3 moves are as bad as a fire, but when a man is on fire, no matter how fast or how often he moves. Avoiding debt is crucial for young people starting out in life. There is almost nothing that drags a person down as much as debt. It is a position of slavery, and yet we find many young people barely out of their teens in debt. One meets a friend and says to him, "Look at this, I got credit for a new suit." He seems to regard clothing as a gift, but often it is not. If he manages to pay and then gets credit again, he adopts a habit that will keep him in poverty all his life. Debt steals a man's self-esteem and almost makes him despise himself, grumbling, groaning, and working for what he has consumed or worn out. When asked to pay, he has nothing to show for his money. This is properly called working for a dead horse. I'm not speaking of traders who buy and sell on credit, nor of those who buy on credit to turn the purchase into profit. An old Quaker said to his farmer son, "John, never trust, but if you get credit, let it be for manure, for that will help you pay it back." Mr. Bisher advises young people to go into debt if they can for a small amount when buying land in rural areas. If a young man says, "I will go into debt for just a little land, and then I will marry," these 2 things will keep him straight or nothing will. This may be safe to a certain extent, but going into debt for food, drink, and clothing should be avoided. Some families have the bad habit of running up accounts in stores and often buy many things they could do without. It is easy to say, "I have credit for 70 days, and if I don't have the money, the creditor won't think anything of it." There are no people in the world with as good memories as creditors. When the 60 days are up, you will have to pay. If you don't pay, you will break your promise and likely resort to falsehood. You may invent an excuse or go into debt elsewhere to pay, but this only further entangles you. A handsome and lazy young man was Horace the apprentice. His boss said to him, "Horace, have you ever seen a snail?" "I believe I have seen one," he replied. "Then you must know what it means to be known, for I am sure you have never surpassed one." "No," said the employer. "Your creditor will meet you or precede you and say to you, 'Now, my young friend, you agreed to pay me, and you did not. You must give me a promissory note with interest.' And so he starts working against you. It's a dead horse. The creditor goes to bed at night and wakes up in the morning better off than he was when he went to bed, because his interests have increased overnight. But you become poorer while you sleep, as interests accumulate against you. Money is in some ways like fire, an excellent servant, but a terrible master. When it masters you, when interests constantly accumulate against you, it will keep you in the worst form of slavery. But let money work for you, and you will have the most devoted servant in the world. It does not have eyes for anyone. Nothing animate or inanimate works as faithfully as money when placed at a secure interest. It works night and day in wet weather or dry. I was born in the state of Connecticut, where the old Puritans had such strict laws that it was said they fined a man for kissing his wife on Sunday. Yet these wealthy old Puritans had thousands of dollars at interest, and on Saturday night they were worth a certain amount. On Sunday they went to church and fulfilled all the duties of a Christian. Waking up on Monday morning, they found themselves considerably richer than the Saturday night before, simply because their money, placed at interest, had faithfully worked for them all Sunday, in accordance with the law. Do not let this harm you. If you do, you will have no chance of success in life when it comes to money. John Randolph, the eccentric Virginian, exclaimed one day in Congress, "Mr. President, I have found the philosopher's stone. Pay as you go." This is indeed closer to the philosopher's stone than any alchemist has ever been. Persevere. When a man is on the right path, he must persevere. I speak of this because there are people who are born tired, naturally lazy, and who lack both self-confidence and perseverance. But they can cultivate these qualities. As David Crockett said, "This thing, remember, when I'm dead, be sure you're right, then go ahead." It is this will, this determination not to let horror or melancholy get the better of you and cause you to slacken your efforts in the struggle for independence, that you must cultivate. How many have been on the verge of achieving their ambitious goal, but, losing self-confidence, relaxed their efforts and let the golden opportunity slip away forever? Undoubtedly, as Shakespeare says, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. If you hesitate, a bolder hand will stretch out before you and snatch the prize. Remember Solomon's proverb, "He who gives beyond his means becomes poor, but the diligent hand enriches." Perseverance is sometimes nothing more than self-sufficiency. Many people naturally look on the dark side of life and lend themselves to problems. They were born that way, then seek advice and will be directed by one wind and blown by another, and cannot trust themselves. Until you have confidence in yourself, you must not hope to succeed. I have personally known men who faced financial setbacks and committed suicide simply because they thought they could never overcome their misfortune. But I have known others who encountered even more serious financial difficulties and overcame them through sheer perseverance, aided by the firm belief that they were doing what was right and that Providence would triumph over evil with good. You will see this illustrated in any walk of life. Take two generals, both understanding military tactics, both West Point educated, if you will, both equally talented. Yet, one has the principle of perseverance and the other does not. The former will succeed in his profession, while the latter will fail. Now the old adage is full of truth and meaning. Anything worth doing is worth doing well. Many men acquire wealth by thoroughly doing their work, while their neighbor remains poor all his life because he only does it halfway. Ambition, energy, industry, and perseverance are indispensable requirements for success in business. Fortune always favors the bold and never lends assistance to a man who does not help himself. Passing time like Mr. Micawber, hoping something will turn up, often leads these men to the asylum or prison, as idleness breeds bad habits and clothes a man in rags. The poor, prodigal vagabond said to a wealthy man, "I have found that there is enough money in the world for all of us, if it were evenly distributed. We must do that, and then we will all be happy together." But the reply was, "If everyone were like you, it would be spent in 2 months, and what would you do then? Divide again and continue to divide, of course." Recently, I read in a London journal the account of a philosophical beggar expelled from a cheap boarding house because he couldn't pay his bill, but who had a roll of papers protruding from his coat pocket. Upon examination, it turned out to be a plan to pay off England's national debt without a penny's help. People must, as Cromwell said, not only trust in Providence but keep their powder dry. Do your part of the work or you will not succeed. One night, as Mohammed camped in the desert, he heard one of his weary followers say, "I will drop my camel and trust it to God." "No, no, no," said the Prophet. "Tie your camel and trust it to God. Do all you can for yourselves, and then trust to Providence, fate, or whatever you please for the rest. It depends upon your own personal exertions." The eye of the employer is often worth more than the hands of a dozen employees. In the nature of things, an agent cannot be as faithful to his employer as to himself. Many employers will recall cases where the best employees have missed points which could not have escaped their own observation. As an owner, no man has the right to expect to succeed in life unless he understands his business. And no one can understand his business thoroughly unless he learns it by personal application and experience. A man may be a manufacturer. He must learn the many details of his business personally, learn something every day, and find that he will almost every day make mistakes, and those same mistakes will be his experience if he takes them to heart. It will be like the Yankee potseller who, having been cheated in quality when buying his goods, said, "Well, there's a little information gained every day. I shall never be cheated in that way again." This is how a man acquires his experience, and it is the best kind if he does not buy it at too dear a rate. I contend that every man must, like the French naturalist Buffon, thoroughly know his trade. He was so adept in the study of natural history that one could bring him a bone, or even a selection of a bone, from an animal he had never seen described, and reasoning by analogy, he could draw the object from which the bone had been taken. Once his students tried to trick him by wrapping one of them in a cowhide and, placing him under the teacher's table as a new specimen. Now, the old adage is full of truth and sense. Anything worth doing is worth doing well. Many men acquire wealth by doing their work thoroughly, while their neighbor remains poor all his life because he only does it halfway. Ambition, energy, industry, and perseverance are indispensable requirements for success in business. Fortune always favors the bold and never comes to the aid of a man who does not help himself. Passing time like Mr. Micawber, hoping that something will turn up, often leads these men to the asylum or prison, as idleness breeds bad habits and clothes a man in rags. The poor prodigal vagabond said to a wealthy man, "I have discovered that there is enough money in the world for all of us, if it were shared equally. We must do that, and then we will all be happy together." But the reply was, "If everyone were like you, it would be spent in 2 months, and what would you do then? Divide again and continue to divide, of course." Recently, I read in a London journal the account of a philosophical beggar expelled from a cheap boarding house because he couldn't pay his bill, but who had a roll of papers sticking out of his coat pocket. Upon examination, it turned out to be a plan to pay off England's national debt without a penny's help. People must, as Cromwell said, not only trust in Providence but keep their powder dry. Do your part of the work, or you will not succeed. One night, while Mohammed camped in the desert, he heard one of his weary followers say, "I will release my camel and trust it to God." "No, no, no," said the prophet. "Tie your camel and trust it to God. Do all you can for yourselves, and then trust to Providence, fate, or whatever you want to call it, for the rest. It depends on your own personal efforts. The eye of the employer is often worth more than the hands of a dozen employees. In the nature of things, an agent cannot be as faithful to his employer as to himself. Many entrepreneurs will remember cases where the best employees missed important points that could not have escaped their own observation. As an owner, no man has the right to expect to succeed in life unless he understands his business. And no one can thoroughly understand his business unless he learns it through application and personal experience. A man may be a manufacturer. He must personally learn the many details of his business, learn something every day, and find that he will almost daily make mistakes, and those same mistakes will serve as experience if he takes them to heart. It will be like the Yankee pot seller who, having been deceived about the quality when buying his goods, said, "Well, there's a little information gained every day. I shall never be deceived in that way again." This is how a man acquires his experience, and it is the best kind if he does not buy it at too high a price. I maintain that every man must, like the French naturalist Buffon, thoroughly know his trade. He was so competent in the study of natural history that one could bring him a bone, or even a selection of a bone from an animal he had never seen described, and reasoning by analogy, he could draw the object from which the bone had been extracted. Once, his students tried to deceive him by wrapping one of them in a cowhide and placing him under the professor's table as a new specimen. When the philosopher entered the room, some of the students asked him, "What animal is this?" Suddenly the animal said, "I am this one, and I am going to devour you." It was natural for the philosopher to want to classify this creature, and upon examining it closely he said, "Split hooves, herbivore. It can be nothing else." He knew that an animal with a split hoof would feed on grass, grain, or some other type of vegetation, and would not be inclined to eat meat whether alive or dead. Thus it was considered perfectly safe. Possessing perfect knowledge of one's craft is an absolute necessity to ensure success. Among the maxims of the elder Rothschild, there was an apparent paradox: be cautious and bold. This may seem contradictory, but it is not. There is great wisdom in this maxim. It is, in fact, a condensed statement of what I have said, namely that you must be cautious in planning your actions, but bold in executing them. A completely cautious man will never dare to take the reins and succeed, and a completely bold man is simply reckless and will ultimately fail. A man may go to the stock exchange and earn $50,000 or $100,000 in a single speculative operation, but if he has only boldness without prudence, it is pure chance. What he gains today, he will lose tomorrow. You must have both prudence and boldness to ensure success. The Rothschilds have another maxim: never deal with an unlucky man or place. This means never dealing with a man or place that never succeeds. Because even if a man seems honest and intelligent, if he tries something and always fails, there is a reason for it, a flaw or a disease that you may not discover, but which exists nonetheless. Luck does not exist in the world. No one goes out in the morning and finds a bag full of gold in the street, much less every day. It may happen once in a lifetime, but regarding pure luck, one is as likely to lose it as to find it. Similar causes produce similar effects. If a man adopts the right methods to succeed, luck will not hinder him. If he does not succeed, there are reasons for it, even if he may not see them. Use the best tools. When men hire employees, they must be careful to get the best ones. They must understand that they cannot have too many good tools to work with, and no tool should be as particular as living tools. If you have a good one, it is better to keep him than to replace him. He learns something every day, and you benefit from the experience he gains. He is worth more to you this year than last year, and he is the last man you should part with, as long as his habits are good and he remains faithful. If an employee becomes more valuable and demands an exorbitant raise, and you cannot do without him, let him go. However, I would keep him if possible to capitalize on the outcome of his experience. An important element in an employee is the brain. You can see advertisements with the inscription, "Hands wanted," but hands are worth little without heads. Mr. Bisher illustrates this. An employee offers his services saying, "I have 2 hands and one of my fingers thinks." "Very good," says the employer. He meets another who says, "I have 2 fingers that think." "Ah, that's better." But a third intervenes and says all his fingers and thumbs think. "That's even better," says the employer. Finally, another intervenes and says, "I have a brain that thinks, I think about everything." "You're the man I want," says the delighted employer. Thus, men who have a brain and experience are the most valuable and should not be easily abandoned. Do not place your business above you. Young people, once their training or apprenticeship in business is finished, instead of pursuing their calling and advancing in their enterprise, often remain idle. They say, "I have learned my trade, but I will not be a wage earner." What's the use of learning my trade then? Unless I settle, do you have capital to start with? No, but I will have it. How will you get it? I will tell you in confidence. I have an old rich aunt who will die soon if she hasn't already. I hope to find some old rich person who will lend me a few thousand to start. If I get the money to start, I will do well. There is no greater mistake than when a young person believes they will succeed with borrowed money. Why? Because every man's experience concurs with Mr. Astor's, who said it was harder for him to gather his first $1,000 than all the millions following that made up his colossal fortune. Money is useless if one does not know its value through experience. Give a boy $20,000 and put him in business, and it is very likely he will lose every dollar within a year. It is like buying a lottery ticket and winning a prize. Easy come, easy go. He does not know its value. Nothing has value if not obtained through effort, self-denial, economy, patience, and perseverance. And starting with unearned capital, there is no certainty of accumulation. Young people, instead of waiting for the shoes of the dead, should set out, for no one is as little accommodating in the face of death as those old rich people. And it is a chance for future heirs that it is so. 9 out of 10 rich people in our country started their lives as poor children with a determined will, industry, perseverance, economy, and good habits. They gradually earned their own money and saved it, and that is the best way to acquire a fortune. Stephen Girard started his life as a poor cabin boy and died with $9 million. A.T. Stewart was a poor Irish boy and paid taxes on $1.5 million of income annually. John Jacob Astor was a poor farmer and died with $20 million. Cornelius Vanderbilt started his life paddling a boat from Staten Island to New York. He offered our government a steamboat worth $1 million and died with $50 million. There is no royal road to learning, says the proverb, and I can say it is also true that there is no royal road to wealth, but I believe there is a royal road to both. The road of learning is a royal road, one that allows the student to broaden their intellect and add to their store of knowledge each day, until in a pleasant process of intellectual growth, they are able to solve the deepest problems, count the stars, analyze every atom of the globe, and measure the firmament. That is a royal road, and it is the only road worth taking. The same goes for wealth. Move forward with confidence, study the rules, and above all, study human nature, for the study of humanity is man. And you will find that by expanding your intellect and muscles, your employed experience will allow you to accumulate more capital every day, which will be increased by interest and other means until you achieve a state of independence. You will find as a general fact that poor children become rich, and rich children become poor. For example, a wealthy man, upon dying, leaves a large estate to his family. His eldest children, who helped him earn his fortune, know the value of money through experience and take their inheritance and increase. The separate shares of the younger children are placed at interest, and to the little children, their heads are patted, and they are told a dozen times a day, "You are rich, you will never have to work, you can always have what you want, because you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth." The young heir soon discovers what this means. He is dressed in the finest clothes and toys, is stuffed with candies and sweets, and is nearly killed with laughter. He moves from school to school, pampered and flattered, becomes arrogant and presumptuous, mistreats his teachers, and carries everything with haughtiness. He knows nothing of the real value of money because he has never earned it, but he knows all about the silver spoon business. At college, he invites his poor classmates into his room, where he pets them, flatters them, and calls them excellent followers because he is so generous with his money. He hosts house dinners, drives fast horses, invites his classmates to parties and revelries, determined to have a good time. He spends his nights partying and having fun, and sends his classmates home with the well-known song, "We won't go home until morning." He encourages them to accompany him to tear down posters, remove doors from their hinges, and throw them into backyards and horse ponds. If they are caught by the police, he supports them. He is taken to the police station and gladly pays the bills. "What's the use of being rich if you can't enjoy it?" he cries to my boys. He hates slow things and doesn't see that young men loaded with foreign money are almost certain to lose everything they inherit and acquire all kinds of bad habits that in most cases ruin their health, wallet, and character. In this country, one generation follows another, and the poor of today are rich in the next or third generation. Their experience leads them to wealth, and to leave great wealth to their grandchildren. These children, raised in luxury, are inexperienced and impoverished. After a long experience, another generation arrives and accumulates wealth again in their turn, and so the story repeats itself, and it is fortunate that by listening to the experience of others, we avoid the reefs and pitfalls where so many have foundered. In England, trade makes the man. If a man in this country is a mechanic or a worker, he is not recognized as a gentleman. At my first appearance before Queen Victoria, the Duke of Wellington asked me in which sphere of life General Thumbkin's father was. "His father is a carpenter," I replied. "Oh, I had heard he was a gentleman," was His Highness's response. "In this republican country, the man makes the business. It doesn't matter if he is a blacksmith, shoemaker, farmer, banker, or lawyer. As long as his business is legitimate, he can be a gentleman. Therefore, every legitimate business is a double blessing, as it helps the man who devotes himself to it and also helps others. The farmer takes care of his own family, but also benefits the merchant or mechanic who needs the products of his farm. The tailor earns his living with his craft, but also benefits the farmer, the clerk, and others who cannot make their own clothes. But all these classes can often be gentlemen. Ambition must be to surpass all others who devote themselves to the same profession. A college student about to finish his studies once said to an old lawyer, "I haven't decided yet what profession I shall follow." "Is your profession full?" "The basement is very crowded." "But there is plenty of room upstairs," was the clever response, "and you will not find any profession, trade, or vocation overcrowded upstairs. Wherever the most honest and intelligent merchant or banker, or the best lawyer, doctor, minister, shoemaker, carpenter, or any other trade is found, he is the most sought-after man and always has enough to do. As a nation, Americans are too superficial. They seek to get rich quickly, and generally do not conduct their business as substantially and deeply as they should. But anyone who excels in his own field, if his habits are good and his integrity unquestionable, cannot fail to secure an abundant fortune and the wealth that naturally follows. Let your motto always be Excelsior, for by living up to it, the word failure disappears. To learn something useful, every man should make sure that his son or daughter learns a trade, a useful trade, so that in these days of changing fortune, of becoming rich today and poor tomorrow, they have something tangible to rely upon. This disposition might save many people from poverty, who by some unexpected turn of fortune have lost all their means. Let hope prevail, but do not be too visionary. Many people always remain poor because they are too visionary. Every project seems to them a sure success, and so they are constantly changing from one enterprise to another, always in the process, always under the stands. The plan to count the chickens before they come out of their shell is an ancient mistake, but it does not seem to improve with age. Do not scatter your powers. Devote yourself to one kind of business and pursue it faithfully until you succeed, or your experience shows you that you must abandon it. Constant hammering on a nail generally brings it home at last to be riveted. When a man's undivided attention is concentrated upon one object, his mind constantly suggests improvements of value that would escape him if his mind were occupied by a dozen different subjects at once. Many fortunes have slipped through a man's fingers because he was busy with too many tasks at the same time. The old warning not to have too many irons in the fire at once makes a lot of sense. Be systematic. Men must be systematic in their affairs. A person who manages his business according to rules, having a time and place for everything and doing his work promptly, accomplishes twice as much and with half the trouble of him who does it negligently and perfunctorily. By introducing a system into all his transactions, by doing one thing at a time, always punctually keeping appointments, you will find time for hobbies and leisure. Whereas the man who does one thing half-heartedly and then turns to something else and does that half-heartedly will have a business without direction and will never know when his working day is done, for it never will be done. Of course, all these rules have their limit. We must try to preserve the happy medium, for there is such a thing as being too systematic. There are men and women, for example, who put things away so carefully that they can never find them again. This is too much like the formality of the red tape at Washington and Mr. Dickens's circumlocution office. All theory and no result. When the Astor House began operating in New York, it was undoubtedly the best hotel in the country. The owners had learned a great deal in Europe about hospitality and were proud of the rigid system that permeated all departments of their grand establishment. When midnight struck and there were several guests, one of the owners would say, "Ring that bell, John." And within 2 minutes, 60 servants with a bucket of water in each hand would arrive in the hall. "This is our fire bell," the owner would say to his guests. "It shows them that we are very safe here. We do everything systematically." This was before Croton water was introduced into the city, but sometimes they carried their system too far. Once, when the hotel was crowded with guests, one of the waiters suddenly felt ill, and though there were 50 waiters in the hotel, the owner thought he must have his full complement, or their system would be upset. Just before dinner time, he hurried down the stairs and said, "There must be another waiter, I am one short." By chance, he caught sight of Pat the Irishman. "Wash your hands and face, hurry to the kitchen, and come to the dining room in 5 minutes." Pat promptly complied, and the owner said, "Now, Pat, you must stand behind those 2 chairs and serve the gentleman who will sit there. Have you ever worked as a waiter?" "Indeed I have, but never as the Irish pilot once, when the captain, thinking he had strayed much off his course, asked him, 'Are you sure you know what you are about, Pat?' 'Certainly, and I know every rock in the channel.' Just then the boat struck a rock. 'Ah, and that is one of them,' continued the pilot. "But to return to the restaurant, Pat," said the owner, "here we do everything systematically. First, you must serve each gentleman a plate of soup, and when they are done, ask them what they will take next." "Oh, I perfectly understand the nuances of the system." Shortly after, the guests entered, and the plates of soup were placed before them. One of the 2 gentlemen ate his soup, the other took no interest in it. He said to the waiter, "Take away this dish and bring me some fish." Pat looked at the soup dish untouched, remembering the owner's instructions regarding the system, replied, "Not before you have eaten the soup." Of course, that would have been pushing the system too far. Read the newspapers. Always have a trusty newspaper to be fully informed of world transactions. One who has no newspaper is cut off from his kind. Nowadays, with telegraphs and steam, many inventions and improvements are being made in every branch of commerce, and he who does not consult the newspapers will soon find himself and his business left out in the cold. Beware of outside operations. Sometimes we see men who have accumulated fortunes suddenly become poor. In many cases, this is due to intemperance and often to gambling and other bad habits. This often happens because a man has engaged in outside operations of any kind. When they become rich, they are told of a great speculation where they could make thousands of dollars. They are constantly flattered by their friends who say they were born lucky, that everything they touch turns to gold. Now, they forget that their economic habits, their integrity of behavior, and their personal attention to an enterprise they understood were the cause of their success in life. They hear the siren's songs, "I will invest $20,000, I have had good luck, and my good luck will soon bring me $60,000. A few days pass, and it is found that he must invest $10,000 more. Shortly thereafter, he is told that everything is all right, but that some unexpected business requires an additional investment of $20,000, which will yield him a rich harvest. But before the time for realizing this arrives, the bubble bursts, he loses everything he possesses, and then he learns what he should have known from the start, that no matter how prosperous he may be in his own trade, if he strays from it and ventures into a trade he does not understand, he will be like Samson when his hair was shorn and he became like any other man. If a man has much money, he should invest in what promises success and probably benefits humanity. But the sums thus invested should be moderate and never risk a fortune earned legitimately by investing it in areas where experience is lacking. Do not support insecurity. I maintain that no man should endorse a note or become surety for another man, whether father or brother, for an amount he cannot afford to lose and which does not concern him, without taking good security. Here is a man worth $20,000 with a prosperous business. You are retired and living off his money. He comes to you and says, "You know that I'm worth $20,000 and owe not a dollar. If you had $5,000 in cash, I could buy a particular lot of goods and double my money in a few months. I could endorse my note for this amount." You reflect, knowing he is worth $20,000 and takes no risk in endorsing his note. You would like to please him and lend your name without taking the precaution of obtaining good security. Soon, he shows you the letter with your endorsed cancelled and probably sincerely tells you he has made the expected profit with the operation. You reflect that you have done a good deed, and this thought makes you happy. After some time, the same thing happens again and you do it again. You now have engraved in your mind the idea that it is perfectly safe to endorse his notes without security. But the trouble is that this man gets money too easily. He just has to take his note to the bank to have it discounted and get cash. He gets money effortlessly without inconvenience to himself. Now observe the result of an opportunity for speculation outside his usual business. It only requires a temporary investment of $10,000. He is sure he will be back before a letter to the bank is due. He presents you a letter for this amount. You sign it almost mechanically, convinced that your friend is responsible and trustworthy. You endorse his notes as a matter of course. Unfortunately, speculation does not come to port as quickly as hoped, and another $10,000 note must be discounted to cover the last one. Before this last note comes due, speculation turns out to be a complete failure, and all the money is lost. The loser tells his endorsing friend, who has lost half his fortune, "It's nothing, I didn't speculate," but he was excited by the spirit of speculation. He sees other people making big sums this way because you rarely hear about the losers. Like other speculators, he seeks his money where he loses it. He tries again to endorse notes. It has become a habit for him, and with each loss, he gets your signature for the amount he desires. Eventually, you discover that your friend has lost all his property and yours. You feel overwhelmed with shock and sadness, and you say, "It's hard, my friend ruined me." But you should add, "I ruined him too." If you had told him from the start, "I will shelter you, but I will never endorse you without taking strong security," He could not have exceeded the length of his rope, and he would never have been tempted to stray from his legitimate activity. Therefore, it is very dangerous to let people have too easy access to money. There are many dangerous speculations, but wiser is he who hates insecurity. So, with the young man starting in business, let him understand the value of money by earning it. When he understands its value, then help him a little to start the enterprise. But remember, men who get money too easily generally do not succeed. The first dollars must be obtained with difficulties and sacrifices to appreciate their value. Advertise your business. We all depend to a greater or lesser extent on the public for our livelihood. All of us do business with the public: lawyers, doctors, shoemakers, artists, blacksmiths, performers, opera managers, railroad presidents, and university professors. Those who deal with the public must ensure that their products are valuable, genuine, and satisfactory. When you get an article that you know pleases your customers and have tested it, they will feel they have had their money's worth. Make it known that you have it, and be careful in your advertising, for it is obvious that if a man has such a good article to sell and no one knows it, it will bring him no profit. In a country like this, where nearly everyone reads and where newspapers are published and circulated in editions from 5,000 to 12,000, it would be very imprudent not to use this channel to reach the public. In advertising, a newspaper reaches the family and is read by the wife and children as well as the head of the household. Therefore, hundreds and thousands of people may read your advertisement while you attend to your daily business. Many can read it while you sleep. The whole philosophy of life is first to sow, then to reap. Thus, the farmer plants his potatoes and corn, sows his grain, then moves on. The time comes to harvest, but he never harvests first and sows afterward. This principle applies to all kinds of business, nothing more prominently than in advertising. If a man has a genuine article, there is no way he can harvest more advantageously than by sowing the public this way. He must have, of course, a really good article that pleases his customers. Any counterfeit will not have lasting success, as the public is wiser than many imagine. Men and women are selfish, and we all prefer to buy where we can get the most for our money. We look where we can do it safely. You can advertise a counterfeit article and induce many people to call and buy at once, but they will denounce you as an impostor and a cheat, and your business will gradually fade, leaving you poor. It is true, few people can safely rely on occasional customers. Everyone needs their customers to return and buy again. One man said to me, "I tried advertising and didn't succeed, yet I have a good article." I replied, "My friend, there may be exceptions to a general rule, but how was it advertised?" "I placed an advertisement 3 times in a weekly and paid $1.50 for it," I replied to him. "Sir, advertising is like learning. A little is risky." A French writer says that the reader of a newspaper does not see the first mention of an ordinary advertisement. He sees the second insertion but does not read it. He reads the third insertion, the fourth insertion. He looks at the price. The fifth insertion, he talks about it to his wife. The sixth insertion, he is ready to buy. And the seventh insertion, he buys. Your goal in advertising is to make the public understand what you have to sell, and if you do not have the courage to continue advertising until you have conveyed this information, all the money you have spent is lost. You are like the man who told the gentleman that if he was given 10 cents, he would save $1. "How can I help you so much with such a small amount?" he asked the gentleman in surprise. "I went out this morning with the firm intention of getting drunk, and I spent my only $1 to achieve this goal, and I didn't quite succeed. With 10 cents more of whiskey, I would achieve it, and thus save the $1 already spent." So a man who advertises must maintain it until the public knows who he is and what his business is. Otherwise, the money invested in advertising is lost. Some men have a particular genius for writing a catchy advertisement that captures the reader's attention at first glance. This fact, of course, gives a great advantage to the advertiser. Sometimes a man becomes popular through a single sign or a curious storefront. Recently, I observed a swinging sign above the sidewalk in front of a store with the inscription in simple letters, "Do not read the other side." Of course I did, like everyone else. I found out that the man had gained all his independence by first attracting the public to his business in this way and then making good use of his customers. Jennings, the hatter, bought the first ticket to Jenny Lin's concert at an auction for $225 because he knew it would be good publicity for him. "Who is the bidder?" asked the auctioneer as he lowered this ticket at Castle Garden. "Jennings, the hatter," came the reply. Here there were thousands of people from Fifth Avenue and distant cities of the highest stations in life. "Who is Jennings, the hatter?" they exclaimed. They had never heard of him. The next morning, newspapers and telegraphs had spread the facts from Maine to Texas, and 5 to 10 million people had read that tickets auctioned for Jenny Lin's first concert amounted to about $20,000, and that a single ticket had been sold to Jennings, the hatter, for $225. Men from all over the country involuntarily took off their hats to check if they had a Jennings hat on their heads. In an Iowa town, it was found that among the crowd around the post office, there was a man wearing a Jennings hat, and he showed it off triumphantly, though worn and not worth 2 cents. "See this!" exclaimed a man. "You have a genuine Jennings hat. What luck you have!" Another man said, "Keep that hat. It will be a valuable relic for your family." Another among the crowd, seeming to envy the owner of this good fortune, said, "Come on, give us all a chance. Auction it off." He did, and it sold as a souvenir for $9.50. What was the consequence for Mr. Jennings? He sold 10,000 more hats per year for the first 6 years. 9/10 of the buyers probably bought out of curiosity, and many of them, seeing they got their money's worth, became his regular customers. This innovative advertisement caught their attention for the first time, and then, since he had a good product, they returned. I'm not saying everyone should advertise as Mr. Jennings did, but I am saying if a man has goods to sell and does not advertise them in some way, it is very likely that one day the sheriff will do it for him. I'm not saying either that everyone should advertise in a newspaper or even use printing ink. On the contrary, though this article is indispensable in most cases, doctors, clergymen, and sometimes lawyers, and a few others, can reach the public more effectively in other ways. But it is evident that they must be known in one way or another, otherwise how could they be supported? Be courteous and kind to your customers. Courtesy and urbanity are the best capital that one can invest in a business. Large stores, gilded signs, flashy advertisements will all be useful if you or your employees treat your customers roughly. The truth is, the more a man is kind and generous, the more he will receive generous patronage. Birds of a feather flock together. The man who gives the most goods of corresponding quality for the least money, while still reserving a profit, will generally have more long-term success. This brings us to the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And they will behave better if you always treat them as if you wanted to get the best out of them for the least. Men who treat their customers harshly, acting as if they do not expect to see them again, will never go wrong. They will indeed not see them again as customers. People do not like to pay and be kicked. One of my museum attendants once told me that he intended to beat a man who was in the lecture room as soon as he left. "Why is that?" I asked. "Because he is not a gentleman," replied the usher. "It doesn't matter," I replied. "He is paying for it, and you won't convince him you are a gentleman by beating him. I cannot afford to lose a customer. If he is beaten, he will not come back to the museum and will urge his friends to go elsewhere for amusement rather than here. And as you can see, I would be a big loser." "But he insulted me," muttered the usher. "Exactly," I replied. "If he were the owner of the museum and you had paid him for the privilege of visiting it, and he had insulted you, there might be a reason for you to feel offended. But in this case he is paying while we receive, so you must endure his bad manners." My usher commented with a laugh that this was certainly the true policy, but added that he would not object to a raise if he were expected to be mistreated to promote my interests. Being charitable is of course a duty and a pleasure for men, but even as a matter of policy, if you do not have a higher incentive, you will find that the generous man will receive patronage, while the stingy and uncharitable will be avoided. Solomon says there is one who scatters and yet increases, and there is one who withholds more than is necessary, but tends to poverty. Of course, true charity comes from the heart. The best quality is to help those who are willing to help themselves. Indiscriminate charity without investigating the worthiness of the recipient is bad in every way, but quietly seeking out and helping those who strive on their own is the kind that disperses and increases. But do not fall into the idea that some people practice by giving a prayer instead of a potato and a blessing instead of bread to the hungry. It is easier to make Christians with a full stomach than an empty one. Preserving one's integrity is more precious than diamonds or rubies. The old miser said to his children, "Make money. Make it honestly if you can, but make money." This advice is not only terribly perverse, but was the very essence of stupidity. It was as if to say, if you have difficulty earning money honestly, you can easily earn it dishonestly. Poor fool, not knowing that the hardest thing in life is to earn money dishonestly, not knowing that our prisons are full of men who have tried to follow this advice, not understanding that no man can be dishonest without being discovered sooner or later, and that when his lack of principles is discovered, almost all paths to success close against him forever. The public rightly rejects all those whose integrity is in doubt. However educated, pleasant, and accommodating a person may be, no one dares to deal with him if there is suspicion of false weights and measures. Strict honesty is not only the foundation of all success in financial life, but in all other aspects as well. Uncompromising integrity of character is invaluable. It assures its possessor a peace and joy that cannot be attained without it, which no amount of money, things, and lands can buy. A man known for being strictly honest may be very poor, but has the purses of the entire community at his disposal, because everyone knows that if he promises to return what he borrows, he will never disappoint them. Therefore, as a simple matter of selfishness, if a man has no higher motive to be honest, everyone will find that Dr. Franklin's maxim will never cease to be true. Honesty is the best policy. Becoming rich does not always equate to success. There are many wealthy poor, while many honest and devoted men and women have never owned as much money as some rich people waste in a week, but who are truly richer and happier than any man who violates the higher laws of his being. Excessive love of money can undoubtedly be and is the root of all evil, but money itself, when used rightly, is not only a useful thing to have at home, but offers the satisfaction of blessing our race by enabling its possessor to widen the scope of human happiness and influence. The desire for wealth is almost universal, and no one can say it is not commendable, provided its possessor accepts its responsibilities and uses it as a friend of humanity. The story of earning money, which is trade, is the story of civilization, and where trade has flourished most, art and science have also produced the noblest fruits. Indeed, generally speaking, money seekers are the greatest benefactors of our race. We owe to them in large part our institutions of learning and art, our academies, colleges, and churches. It is not an argument against the desire or possession of wealth to say that there are sometimes misers who accumulate money simply to hoard and who have no higher aspiration than to grasp everything within their reach. Just as there are sometimes hypocrites in religion and demagogues in politics, there are also misers among money hoarders. However, these are only exceptions to the general rule. But when in this country we find a nuisance and an obstacle such as a miser, we remember with gratitude that in America we have no laws of primogeniture, and that in due time the accumulated dust will disperse for the benefit of humanity. To all men and women, therefore, I say with conscience, make money honestly and not otherwise, for Shakespeare truthfully said, "He who wants money, means, and content is without 3 good friends."